Hey guys, it's Marisol. This is Soul Stitchery, and today's Wednesday, so you know what that means. It's episode 6 of one quilt from start to finish, and you'll pardon the little barking noises that you hear in the background. We have a new doggy in the family, and his name is Archer, and Archer is cute as a button and a little bit vocal, so you might hear him. And we'll introduce Archer formally to everybody in a day or two. But in the meantime, today we're going to talk about half square triangles. So here is what we're looking at. If you're following along, you know that we cut background fabric in 2 different sizes, and we also cut coordinating fabric in 2 different sizes. And so we have the larger of the 2 sizes now that we have to make half square triangles out of. So half square triangle, for those of you who are beginner quilters, is a pretty basic shape that we use all the time. You'll find it in just about every single traditional quilt block, and you will find it in many modern quilt blocks. It's the precursor, in my opinion, to a pinwheel, and also the precursor in technique, I think, to a flying geese, to that. And so if you learn how to do this and do this comfortably and well, you should have everything else all figured out, maybe, but we'll see. So here's how I do mine. Easy peasy. You get 2 flying geese out of 2 flying geese, because we were on the flying goose topic, right? So you get 2 half square triangles out of every block that you cut to make the half square triangles into. So what I do is I'll draw a line from one point to the other on my block, and I then sew a 1/4 inch to each side of that block. I'm going to hold it really close so you can see. See that sewing? So my presser foot is not a guided 1/4 inch foot. If you're a beginner quilter, you can buy, for most machines, you can buy what we quilters call a 1/4 inch foot. And what that is a foot that will give you a marking or a toe width that is exactly 1/4 inch. So you just have to sew under that foot and you'll know exactly where your 1/4 inch seam is. Some of them even throw a little metal piece on the side of the foot so that you just butt your raw edge right up to that little metal piece and you're always at a 1/4 inch. Technically. I don't have one of those on my machine. I just have a regular foot. What I've done is my machine has a setting where I can move the needle back and forth. So I measured exactly a 1/4 inch. I figured out where my needle position has to be to make a 1/4 inch exactly from the edge of the foot that I'm using. And I set it in the memory of my machine. So I just bring it up and I always do a 1/4 inch. However you are comfortable with your 1/4 inch seam. If you are doing that and getting a consistently accurate scant 1/4 inch seam, then do that. And then do that to the left and to the right of the line that you draw on the fabric. It doesn't matter which square you draw your line on, so long as you can see it as you're going through and sewing. So I have done that. I have sewn on each side of the lines that I drew. I didn't want to bore you while I drew a bunch of lines, but I've sewn on each side of these. So for every single square in this pile, I will get 2 half square triangles. So I'm going to change the camera angle so that you guys can watch as I cut, press, and trim all of these half square triangles. If you have subscribed to my YouTube channel, check out the post that I did that was maybe a month ago or so. Check that post out. It's a half square triangle tutorial. And I go into a lot more detail of how I do my half square triangles, which way I press them and all that stuff, and how I trim them, because I use a very specific tool to trim them. See, there's Archer. He's just cruising around looking at the shop, getting to know his stomping ground. So I encourage you to check out that video. I'm going to change the camera up and I'll be right back. All right, guys. So we have put together our larger squares, right sides facing. And just to kind of reiterate, I talked about this in last week's episode, but solids don't have a right or wrong side for those of you who are beginners. For those of you who know this already, thanks for bearing with us as we help educate incoming generations of quilters. Batiks are the same, guys, as solids. They don't have a back or a front. So I just made sure that my right side is down on that printed fabric, which is Tula Pink's Fairy Dust in white. And then I drew my line. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So I drew my line from point to point. I mentioned earlier that if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please be sure to subscribe and like, and also don't forget to hit the bell. That'll give you notifications every time I put a new video out. But there is a video on there, a tutorial on there about how to make half square triangles. So check that out if you want further detail on how I do it. But I draw my line diagonally on one of the blocks. And then I sew a 1/4 inch seam to each side of that line. So swipe down one way, turn it around, sew it down the other way, and now I have something that looks like this. So the first step to make this into a half square triangle is to move these out of the way, grab your ruler, and then you're gonna cut on the line that you drew. And that's going to split your square into 2 half square triangles. So I'm just going to cut along the line that I drew. And if you look at the seam underneath my ruler, you can see that it falls right at that 1/4 inch line. I like to set my 1/4 inch for a scant 1/4 inch. Be sure that you're right on the line. Be sure that you've got some good pressure on that ruler before you use your rotary cutter. And then just go ahead and swipe a cut right there, and now I have 2 pieces. So if I open this up, you're going to see this really pretty raspberry rose solid with the Tula Pink Fairy Dust in white. I'm going to now press this, and what I'm going to do with my half square triangles is I'm going to press them to the dark side. Beginner quilters, what that means is that when you take it to the pressing mat, you are going to press it so that the lighter fabric lays over the dark side of the half square triangle. That's what it means when we press to the dark. It just means that you're going to press the seam over to whichever fabric is darker of the two. So let's move this mat out of the way for a brief second. I'm going to bring over my iron, and I'm going to show you how I press my half square triangles. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay the iron on the seam itself for just a second or two. I have an Aliso iron, so that iron can rest in this position because it raises itself off of the ironing pad. Then I'm going to take my finished half square triangle, and I'm going to open it up from the dark side so that that seam is going to lay over. And I'm going to just do the same thing. I'm just going to lay the iron on top of it for a few seconds. I might give it a wiggle, but not always. And I think that some quilters might go, no, don't wiggle it. But I might give it a wiggle, just a little wiggle. And so that is how I press my half square triangles. So watch again. I'll just open this up, and I will run my fingernail across it gently just to lay it open like that. And then I just grab the iron and place the iron down and just wait a couple seconds. And there you go. You have a perfectly pressed half square triangle. Now the next step is trimming, and I'm going to show you how I do that in just a second. All right, so in the absence of any particularly special tool to do this trimming, what I would do is I would figure out the finished dimensions of this block. I would take a ruler and I would lay it, and trim off each side carefully to make this block, square up to whatever the finished measurement should be. I happen to use a specialty tool called a block lock ruler. And I will have these available in the shop. They are on order, so you can pre-order them if you'd like to purchase one. Just go on the shop. It will say pre-order, and you just order the size that you would like. But I use these to trim up all of my half square triangles. This is in the video that I created on my YouTube channel about half square triangles. And basically all you do is take your block, and the logo has to lay on the lighter side, or the side that's where the seam is not pressed to. So the side without the logo goes to whichever side the seam is laying. See how my seam is coming towards the dark? We know I press to the dark. So the seam is coming this way. The non-logo side is on this side. The logo side is on that side. And really all I do is line this ruler up with the finished measurement of the block. And then I just trim, and I trim again, and then I flip it around, and I flip my ruler around, because again, my logo has to be on the lighter side, or the side where the seam is not. And you'll feel it. It's got a little groove in it right here. I don't know if you can see that there's like a divot in the ruler, and that runs all the way diagonally across. So when you slide it onto your half square triangle, see, it will move. It just catches that seam really perfectly. You don't want to push on it too hard or wiggle it at all, because you don't want to distort that seam. But you just swipe and swipe, and just like that, you have a perfectly finished half square triangle exactly to the measurements that you desire. And so now, if you're following along, if you bought the kit or have some fabric at home and you have the pattern and you're just making your own shipwrecked quilt along with me, now is the step where we're going to cut all of these and we're going to make them all into half square triangles. We're going to press, trim, and then the next step is a 4-patch. So I'm going to spin the camera around for a sec. We're going to do some cutting and some trimming, and we're going to talk about the 4 patches that we're making. Okay, guys, so now we've done our half square triangles, and here are the samples that I have from the last segment of the video. And now we're moving on to 4 patches. That's the next step in this pattern. And so I've got my strips cut. And what I did for the full-size quilt was I used, as opposed to using 2 kinds of, or 2 patterns of fabric, I picked 4. And my kits are packaged the same way. So the throw size will give you 2 contrasting fabrics. Like this is daisy chain in clover and unconditional love in clover. So if you have the throw size, you may get either this or the bluebell. If you have a preference, please make sure you put that in the notes when you order your kit, and I will definitely see if I can find one with those colors in them. If not, I'll cut that for you. So not to worry. If you're getting the double, then you're going to get 2 of those. You're going to get the daisy chain in clover and unconditional love in clover, and then you'll get unconditional love in bluebell and daisy chain in bluebell. So that covers that piece. Now, what we're going to make is we're going to make 4 patches. How easy is this? You grab a strip of your background fabric, and you grab a strip of one of these, and you just sew them together. Sew them right along here and sew them together. Now, I cut my strips from fat quarters, and then I cut these strips from yardage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subcut these so that I have strips that are the same length. And once I do that, then I will go to the machine and I will sew all of these in sets of 2. So I'll sew one like this, and then I'll sew another with these 2 guys, like that, and so on. And as soon as these sets are all sewn together, then we're going to move on to the next step of creating those 4 patches. And how pretty are they going to look? I'm super, super excited. I don't know about you guys, but man, it's just so nice to see it all come together. That's probably one of my favorite parts of quilting, is how it just all kind of comes together so prettily. So let me sew some of these together, and I'll be right back so we can start cutting.
Okay, so here's the next step. We have our little strips together. I have just made my background fabric strips. I cut those from the yardage, so they were with the fabric by what the measurement is. And then the contrasting colors I cut from fat quarters. So those are 20 inches by the width of the shape. And so I wanted to make sure that I could sew each piece together. So I just cut the very fold off of those strips that were from the yardage of this fabric. And that way I have two pieces that are equal in length that I can sew together. So a couple things for you guys that are beginners. When I first started quilting, I had trouble with the beginning and the very end of the sewing where it didn't seem to like stick it together very well. It didn't seem to sew the pieces together very well. And I was always told that you don't have to backstitch there. So I never do backstitch just because it creates a little more bulk. I don't want to take the chance that the thread going back and forth in one space might make my 1/4 inch seam not quite right. So what I do is I then use a leader or a follower, and I'm going to try to turn the camera a little bit here so you could see this little orange guy here. So I save my leftover binding. If I've bound something, I save the binding pieces, the scraps that I trim off, and I use these. I just cut them into little pieces like this, and I use them as a leader. Like I put that in before I start sewing, and then I finish off with one. So there's one always in the machine for the next set of sewing. And what I find that does is that it creates a more tensioned stitch at the very beginning so that it holds that piece together. Now, when you're working with your blocks and you're putting things together, as you quilt more and as you piece more, you'll become more familiar with the things to look out for. So you won't ever tug really hard or pull on that end, and you'll always make sure that you press that end very carefully so that it stays together the way it's supposed to. So that's a little thing on leaders and these little these little guys that I put in my machine. If you see those as I'm sewing, that's what that is all about. It works for me. If you guys have a tip or something that you do to do that, I know some people do backstitch, and that's a thing, I guess. And that definitely will hold it together for sure. It will not come apart or unravel at the beginning or the end. So we're going to take these two strips of fabric, a contrasting and the background, and I am just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam right down one side of it. So I'm going to put my eyes on, get my hair out of the way, and I'm going to just sew this together. I like to take my time going down and make sure that my edges match as I sew. I want to make sure that all of the things that I have to line up are lined up. All right, so we're just going to get these two together. And, strips makes me so nervous because I feel like it gets wiggly as you go along. And I used to think that going quickly and getting it like zip right through, like I would see these seamstresses and people and I'd go, my gosh, why am I so slow? And they go so fast. And, a couple things on that. It's like, I don't know why I always compare myself to other people. No need to do that. And as you will see people say, stop that right now. So there's no need for that. And then also, I feel like, there's no explanation when you're watching YouTube videos and stuff about, what speed a machine is on or whether somebody is videotaping at a normal speed and then speeding up the video. I never took those things into consideration, right? And so I'm here to tell you, if you're a brand new quilter, take your time, go slow. I sew as quickly as I can without making mistakes, which for me, it's not really super fast. So, anytime I try to go super fast, I always end up doing something the wrong way or sewing something together backwards or pushing the fabric through, that's a thing, or pulling too hard. So I just take my time and I just make sure that my seams are lined up, make sure that my seam allowance is accurate. As a new quilter, you will hear it everywhere you look, everywhere you read, if you watch any videos. Any experienced quilter will tell you that your quilting game is only as good as your 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's the truth. The faster you can get that perfected and consistent, the better you'll see that your quilts will turn out. So it's about getting a perfect 1/4 inch seam. I use a scant 1/4 inch, which is like a 1/4 inch seam minus like 2 threads. That's about it. I use a scant 1/4 inch seam, and I practiced until I got myself to the point where no matter where on this strip of fabric you measure, it's always going to be that same 1/4 inch. So now we're going to take this strip set, is what we call these once you put them together, right? Because it's just a set of strips. I'm just going to give it a quick finger press here before I take it over to the actual iron, because I want you to see that. Tell me that's not pretty. Like, my favorite color in the world is green. So this makes me happy. Like, this is a happy vibe just because. Like, look at the green here and the green there. Ah, my heart. I love it. All right. So I have quite a few more of these to make, but we're going to go back over to the cutting table so I can show you how to actually make a 4-patch. And then I'll get to sewing again, slowly. Okay, guys, so we're at the cutting table. I do want to point out one thing. If you purchase the pattern, and I'm going to put this in the description as well, so that you guys can see it. The cutting directions for this 4-patch, there is one tiny error which can cause a huge problem. So the cutting directions say to cut a 2.5 inch section here, so that it will measure 3 by 5. But if you cut it 2.5 inches wide, it's not going to measure 3 by 5. It'll measure 2.5 by 5. So we're going to do that quick correction here. We're going to cut those correctly. I am going to just show you how to put a basic 4-patch together. The rest of the instructions are in the pattern itself. So that was the only thing I wanted to point out. For those of you who actually have purchased the pattern, I don't want you to miss that when you're reading it. But do remember, we talked about the first video and the second video, I think I mentioned it as well. We talked about reading that pattern more than once, and that's exactly why, because pattern designers and pattern writers, they go through that pattern a million times. They have people test it. And sometimes you're reading what you expect to see as opposed to what's actually there. And sometimes that can create an issue. So, and always, always remember, for those of you who are new quilters, this is something I never knew as a new quilter, is if you purchase a pattern and you want to make sure if there have been any corrections on that pattern, you can go to the pattern designer's website and look up errata. That's ERRATA, and I'll put that in the description too. But if you look up pattern errata, you will find for that designer any corrections that have been made to the pattern since the publication of the pattern, since the printing of the pattern. So be sure and do that when especially if you're working on a pattern that's like super involved and lots of little pieces. You always want to make sure, did they change anything or fix anything in the pattern since they printed it? So we have cut 2 pieces from our strip set. Here's our strip set. This was the one we put together, right? See how pretty green and background fairy dust. And so now, in order to make that 4-patch, all we do is flip this around. And in case I forgot to mention, guys, I did also press this one to the dark, right? So between these 2 fabrics, this is the darker of the 2, in my opinion. And so I pressed my seam to that side. And so, because I did that, when I make my 4-patch, again, I'm just going to flip one of the pieces oppositely. I'm going to turn it over onto its partner. And I can feel right here, right along the sewn seam. So right along the thread, if I feel it, I can feel that those seams have nested. If you're a new quilter, you may not know what that means, but nested seams, let me see if I can bring it really close. nested seams are these guys right here. See how they kind of fall in line with each other right there? They kind of just match together perfectly. If they are unmatched, so if I slide this over a little bit, when I feel underneath, I can feel the bulk. As soon as I slide it into that little groove, it just clicks in there. It just kind of fits perfectly. So now I'm just going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam here, and I'll be right back to show you that finished 4 patch. Okay guys, so we have our 2 pieces sewn together. Nice 1/4 inch seam there. And remember we talked about nesting these two? Well, I did nest them. I sewed them together that way, nice and tight. They're really close together in there. And look what that does to the actual piecing. Check out those corners. Can you see how nicely that meets together? That is a quilter's dream right there. Corners and points that are perfectly matched and perfectly pointed together. It's just, right? It's kind of one of those moments. Yay! So I'm going to flip the camera around. We're going to talk a little bit about next steps, and we'll talk about what's coming next week in next week's video.
Okay, guys. So we have our first 4 patch. I'm so excited about this. And we also worked on our half square triangles today. Remember, there's videos on this stuff, just on the half square triangles. On the YouTube channel, there's a whole tutorial on those. So if you don't feel like you got enough out of the explanation today, there's more in that video. And you can always email me and ask me specific questions, put your questions in the comments. I try to reply to every single comment. So it may take me a couple days because, again, it's just me, but I will reply. So if you stick your question there, I'll get to it and I'll answer it for you. So for me, I have 66 more of these to do and 100 and umpty million of these to do. I'm not exactly sure how many. I think, and Jen is so good, like she puts, how many finished pieces you're going to have in each one. And I think that, yeah, on the half square triangles, I don't know how many, but we're going to have a lot because it's this entire pile that I have to get through of cutting and trimming and doing all that stuff. And for me, that's like super fun. Like I love half square triangles and I love cutting them and trimming them, and they look so pretty and perfect when they're done. And then we'll do these, and these are easy. I think these are super easy. If you have questions or anything about any of these things, it doesn't matter if I think it's easy. If you're having trouble, definitely reach out. I will help. So we have a ton of these to do too. And then next week, we're going to start putting all the rows together. So that's going to be pretty much, the finish of the Shipwrecked Quilt. I am so excited to see it all together. And then I'm going to quilt it, and it's going to be super fun. So, and then we'll bind it, and we'll talk about labeling and what I use to label. And then remember the block lock rulers that I talked about both in the tutorial and in today's video. These are going to go on pre-sale. They're so great. You're going to love them. I would say if you're not in the market for like a full set of them, if you have like a 4.5 inch and a 6.5 inch, I think those two will let you do just about everything, unless you're doing like really giant half square triangles like Susie Quilts does that. Her fabric is through Art Gallery Fabric, and she does really big half square triangles. I confess I have a 12.5 inch one. I've used it like maybe twice, but that's me. Okay. I have a problem. I have a problem. So these rulers will be available for pre-sale. Make sure you jump in and grab the ones that you would like to have. And then I do want to give a shout out to my friend Krista. All of this was her idea. So Krista, thank you so much for this great idea. I didn't realize that people would enjoy doing it so much, that I would enjoy doing it so much. It's been a lot of fun. We do have maybe 1 or 2 videos left for this project. If you have a project that you would like to see, please let me know. I think my next project that's a big might, be something to do with English paper piecing. So if you're interested in learning that technique, or if you're an English paper piecer and you want to hang out and see how I do it, please, please tag along. It's an idea. If you have an idea, put it in the comments and let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Let's see what we can do. So thank you so much for following along. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell. You'll get a notification every week when my new video comes out. I think I'm going to stick with Wednesdays. I think I'm going to do Wednesday videos every week. And whether we're working on a quilt or just talking about what's going on in the shop, I will see you on Wednesdays for the next episode of One Quilt from Start to Finish. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for, being there and watching and liking and subscribing. It's all about you guys and it's all about the quilting community and I really appreciate it. Have a great week, everybody. See you next Wednesday.